I had ruled Valkren for 9 years without a mate, and in that time I had learned to trust Dran the way other kings trusted their generals. He was not a pet. He was not a symbol, though the court used him as one. He was a gray wolf the size of a pony, stone-shouldered, with eyes the color of old ice, and he had been given to me the morning I was crowned by a man who said, "When he chooses, you will know the reason." I had not understood then. I understood less with each passing year because Dran chose nothing except my company and the East Kennels, and I had stopped waiting for him to show me what the old man meant. On the 4th day of Dran's fever, I stood in the corridor outside the kennel gate and listened to the silence where his breathing should have been, and felt something close in my chest like a fist. 3 handlers. 2 were men I trusted with the outer perimeter in winter, which meant they were not easily frightened. The first had come back with a gash across his forearm that needed 12 stitches. The second had not gone in at all after the door opened. He had heard the sound Dran made and stepped back without shame, which told me everything. The third had managed 3 minutes before Dran rose off the straw, and the handler decided his life was worth more than his pride. The court healer stood at the gate with me that 4th morning and said the fever would break or it would not, and that she was not in the practice of making promises to wolves. I thanked her. I sent her away. I stood at the gate for another hour, and Dran lay in the straw at the far end of the kennel and breathed and did not look at me. That had never happened before. In 9 years, he had always looked at me. I had a lord gathering that evening. 7 of the 8 border lords of Valkren, called in for the winter accounting, seated at the long table in the assembly hall with their ledgers and their opinions, and their various daughters they had brought without being asked. I sat at the head of the table and heard the accounts and gave my rulings, and behind every sentence I was thinking of Dran lying in the straw with his great head flat to the ground, and his ice-pale eyes aimed at the opposite wall. Lord Veth, who held the western ridge, had brought his eldest daughter to the gathering, which was not unusual. Veth brought her every year, and every year she sat in the gallery above the hall in a dress that grew more elaborate with each visit, and every year I pretended not to notice the implication. Veth mentioned her in passing, as he always did. Ilian has studied healer craft, my Lord King. She has a particular gift with animals, and I gave him the same answer I always gave, which was a nod that meant I had heard him, and a silence that meant the subject was finished. His daughter was accomplished and careful and bore the slight with more dignity than her father. I had nothing against her. I simply knew, the way I knew the weight of the crown and the temperature of the river in late autumn, that she was not mine. The garrison runner arrived at the door just before the last lamplighting of the evening. A boy, hardly 16, who had clearly run up 3 flights of stairs and was trying not to let it show. He caught Warden Fell's eye across the hall, and Fell came to my shoulder and leaned down. "There is a woman in the East Kennels, my lord. Has been for 2 hours. She's with the Great Wolf." I set down my wine. "Which handler sent her?" Fell's expression was careful. "No handler sent her, my lord. She is one of the garrison tenders, works the outer ward pens, the draft animals, the fowl. She has no leave to be in the East Wing at all." "And Dran?" Fell paused. "The runner says the wolf hasn't moved against her." Around the table, the lords had gone very still in the particular way of people who are pretending to study their papers. I stood, "Continue the accounting." "Warden Fell will preside." The East Kennels were built under the oldest part of Valkren granite walls, packed earth floors, torches in iron brackets that had not been replaced since my father's time and still threw the same orange light. The smell was straw and wolf and the particular mineral cold of deep stone. I had been in this corridor hundreds of times. I knew the way Dran's breathing sounded at rest, the way the straw shifted when he moved, the small sounds the kennel made around midnight when the wind came off the high ridge. What I heard as I came down the last steps was silence, and then a voice. Low, even, not especially quiet, the voice of someone who was not trying to soothe, who was simply talking the way you talk when you are working and the work requires concentration. "Hold still. I know it pulls. It's going to keep pulling until the morning because that's what poultices do when the wound is this far in, and I am sorry about that, but the alternative is that it festers further, and then I will not be able to help you at all." A pause. "I'm going to press here. Tell me if it's too much." I stopped in the corridor before the gate. Through the iron bars I could see the far end of the kennel, and I could see Dran. He was lying on his side in the straw. His great gray head was not flat to the ground. It was resting, settled, the way it rested when he slept, though his eyes were open. In front of him, kneeling in the straw without apparent concern for her dress, was a woman I had never seen before. She had dark hair pulled back plainly, a garrison tender's tunic, and her sleeves rolled to the elbows. Her hands were working something into the fur along Dran's shoulder, a poultice, from the smell of it, the sharp herb smell cutting through the kennel's cold, and she was doing it with the even, patient pressure of someone who understood exactly what she was doing and had no need to be watched. Dran's eyes tracked her hands. They did not move to the gate. They did not move to me. In 9 years, Dran had never failed to mark me entering this corridor. I stood there for a moment in the torchlight and tried to name what I was feeling, and the closest I could come was recognition. Not of her face, which I did not know, something quieter than that and deeper. A settling, the way a door settles when the latch finally catches. I opened the gate and stepped in. She looked up, not startled. She had heard me on the stairs, I thought, or Dran had told her in whatever way Dran communicated, because there was no flinch in her. Only the mild, unguarded attention of someone who had been expecting an interruption and had decided to wait for it to arrive rather than worrying. Her eyes were very steady, darker than Dran's, warmer. She looked at me the way people very rarely look at me, which is to say, without rearranging their face before they did it. She did not stand. She was still working the poultice into the wound, and she had apparently decided that the poultice mattered more than ceremony, and I found that I could not argue with it. "My Lord King," she said, not a greeting exactly, more like an acknowledgement the way you acknowledge weather. I looked at Dran. His great side rose and fell with slow breathing. His head had not moved from its resting position. His eyes were still on her hands. "He has not permitted a handler near him in 4 days," I said. "I know," she pressed carefully along the wound's edge. "I could smell the infection from the outer ward. It's deep. Something got under the fur and stayed. Whoever looked at it before probably didn't want to press as hard as it needs." She glanced up briefly. "He doesn't like it when I press, but he's bearing it. He put 3 handlers in the infirmary." I imagine he was in considerable pain by then. She said it without accusation, matter of fact. Pain makes everyone less patient. I stood in the middle of the kennel floor and watched her work, and Dran lay still and breathed, and the torches threw their orange light across the straw and the gray wolf in her steady hands, and I thought, I have been waiting for this, without knowing what this was, without knowing there was something to wait for. "What is your name?" I asked. "Sira," she paused. "I tend the outer ward animals, draft horses mostly, some fowl. I had no leave to be in the east wing." She said the last sentence plainly, as though reading a report. "I'll accept whatever consequence follows. I thought the wolf needed attention, and I had the materials." "He did need attention," I said. "The consequence is that you have my thanks." She looked at me again. Something moved in her expression, not surprise exactly, something quieter. "All right," she said. I stayed until the second lamp hour. She did not tell me to leave, and I did not offer to. I sat on a low stool near the gate, and she worked, and occasionally she spoke to Dran in that same even, unconcealing voice, and Dran breathed and occasionally closed his eyes, which was more peace than he had shown in 4 days. Twice she spoke to me practical questions. Did I know when he had last eaten? Did I know whether the wound had been cleaned before she arrived? What the handlers had used when they attempted entry? I answered each one. She listened with complete attention and no flattery. When she finally rose, her knees were dark with damp straw, and she had a streak of poultice along her left forearm. She gathered her materials into a cloth sack with the methodical care of someone who keeps track of everything they own. "He'll need this again in the morning," she said, "and the day after. The fever should turn by the 3rd day if the poultice draws correctly. He should drink more than he probably will." She hesitated, and for the first time something uncertain moved in her face. "I can come back if that is permitted, or I can tell one of your handlers what to do if you'd rather." "Come back," I said. She nodded, as though this was a reasonable answer to a reasonable question, and she left. Dran turned his head and watched her go. Then, and only then, he turned his head and looked at me. I looked back at him. I thought about the old man who had given him to me the morning of my coronation. When he chooses, you will know the reason. "All right," I said to both of them, to neither of them, to whatever it was that had just settled into place in the deep stone dark of the kennel. "All right." She came the next morning before the household was properly awake, moving through the east wing the way water moves through a familiar channel. No announcement, no hesitation, as if she had been doing it for years. The handler on gate duty told me later he had stepped aside without quite knowing why. I believed him. There was something about Sira that made waymaking seem natural, not because she demanded it, but because her certainty of purpose left no gap for opposition. Dran's fever was lower by mid-morning. The handler who brought me the report looked as though he was not entirely sure this was a thing that had happened. I did not go down to the kennel that morning. I had the resumption of the Lord Gathering and 3 border disputes to settle, and a letter from the Eastern Prefect about grain levies that had apparently been misread by everyone involved for 2 consecutive seasons. I sat at the head of the table and gave my rulings and spoke carefully to Lord Veth about the Ridge Road repair, and more carefully still about his daughter, who was not present at the table, and who had, by all accounts, handled the previous evening's pointed quiet with more grace than it deserved. But I was aware, in a way I had not been aware of anything outside my own work for a long time, of where the East Wing sat in relation to the Assembly Hall, of what was happening in the kennels below the old stone while the lords argued about grain. She came again that evening, after the day's gathering had adjourned. I heard this from Warden Fell, who had by now apparently decided to simply update me without being asked, which was the correct decision. "The wolf ate," Fell said. "Properly, the tender says, first time in 4 days. How is she at the gate?" "The handler lets her through now, doesn't ask for leave. He said, and I report this accurately, that Dran walks to the gate when he hears her step on the stair." I thought about that for a moment. "All right," I said, and went back to the grain levy letter. The second day of her coming and going, I went down to the kennel at the second lamp hour again. This time she was already aware I would come, or she seemed to be, which was nearly the same thing. She had left room on the low stool. She did not comment on this, and neither did I. Dran was sitting up. His ears were forward, and his eyes were sharp with something approaching their usual clarity. He leaned into her hands when she worked the poultice, which was not something I had ever seen him do with anyone. "He's better," she said, not a question. "He is. Another 2 days and you can stop the poultice. The wound will need to be watched, but he'll manage the rest himself." She looked at Dran thoughtfully. "He's careful with himself, I think, under ordinary circumstances." "Very careful," I agreed. "He is not usually careless." "No," she smoothed the fur along his shoulder with the same even pressure. "I thought not." There was a silence, the easy kind, the kind that does not require filling. "You're not afraid of him," I said. She considered this as if it were a genuine question deserving a genuine answer. "I don't think so, not the way you mean. He was in pain and needed help. That is not a reason to be afraid." She paused. "He is very large, and I imagine he is capable of being very frightening when he chooses." She glanced at Dran with something that was almost amusement. "He has not chosen that with me." "No," I said, "he has not." She looked at me then, in that direct and unguarded way she had, and for a moment neither of us said anything. "Why do you come yourself?" she asked, not challenging, genuinely curious. "You have handlers, you have a warden, you could have someone report to you." "I could," I said. She waited. "He is mine," I said finally. "Whatever he needs, I want to know that it is done." Something in her expression shifted, not much, just a degree of warmth that had not been there before. She looked back at Dran. "That makes sense," she said simply. The third evening of the Lord Gathering was the final session before the winter adjournment, the formal closing, the record seal, the gifts exchanged between lords as the old custom required. The assembly hall was lit with twice the usual torches because Lord Veth insisted on it, and Lord Veth was paying for his own candles, so no one had argued. The lords were in better spirits than they had been. The border disputes were settled, the grain matter had resolved itself, and the prospect of riding home before the first heavy snow made everyone generous. I sat at the head of the table and sealed the winter record and accepted the customary gifts, and said the customary things, and the lords drank their wine and told their stories, and above in the gallery Veth's daughter sat in her elaborate dress with the patience of someone who has learned not to expect too much and was trying to find peace in the fact. The east corridor door was at the far end of the hall beside the winter screen. No one used it during gatherings. It led down to the old stores, the armory annex, the kennel stairs. I was in the middle of a sentence about the Eastern Road when I heard it. The door opened. Not loudly, quietly in fact. And then there was a sound I knew so well I sometimes heard it in sleep. The sound of Dran's paws on old stone, the particular weight and rhythm of him, the slight drag he had always had on his right forefoot since a winter hunt 3 years ago. The lords heard it before they saw the source. I watched their faces go still in sequence, like lamps going out in a row, the conversation dying, the wine cups lowered, every head turning toward the far end of the hall. Dran walked in from the east corridor. He was not hurrying. He never hurried. He moved through the assembly hall the way he moved everywhere, with the unhurried deliberateness of something that has no need to rush because nothing that matters is going to leave before he arrives. His gray coat caught the doubled torchlight and threw it back in silver. His head was up. His ice-pale eyes were aimed at the far side of the room, and he moved between the lords' chairs as though they were trees in a forest, without acknowledgement, without deviation. The hall was completely silent. At the far end, at the edge of the winter screen, where the east corridor door had come open, Sira stood with a clean cloth in her hands and an expression of resigned surprise on her face, the expression of someone who had come to do a task and found the task had already made other arrangements. She had clearly come to check his dressing. She had clearly not expected him to hear her from 2 floors up and come to meet her. Dran crossed the full length of the assembly hall and lay down across her feet. He did it with a deliberateness that was almost ceremonial. He circled once, the way wolves circle, and then settled, all that gray weight lowering slowly to the stone floor, his great head coming to rest against her ankles, his eyes half closed. The lords of Valkren, 7 of them, sat in complete silence. She looked down at Dran. Then she looked up at the hall full of lords and found me at the head of the table, and her expression was something I had not seen on her face before, not fear, not triumph. Something in between those things, a startled openness, as if she had turned a corner and found a landscape she did not have a name for yet. Then the light changed. It was not a torch. It came from her wrist, her left wrist, the one closer to Dran's head. A light the color of the moon in late autumn, silver gold, not bright enough to hurt, bright enough to see. The mark rose to the surface of her skin the way ice patterns rise on winter glass, in lines that curved and branched and completed themselves in a shape I had known since childhood. The bond mark of the Alpha King of Valkren. There was a sound from the gallery, a small, soft sound, Lord Veth's daughter standing from her seat, and then silence. I was moving before I had decided to move. Down the length of the table, between the chairs, past the row of still lords with their still faces. I was aware of the hall around me the way you are aware of a room you have walked through 1,000 times, without thought, automatically. Because every piece of my attention was on the woman at the end of the hall with the mark burning silver gold on her wrist and the great wolf lying across her feet. I reached her and stopped. She was looking at her wrist. Her expression was careful and concentrating, the same expression she had when she worked the poultice attention without panic, reading what was in front of her. She looked up at me. "I don't know what this is," she said. Her voice was steady. She was remarkable. I thought this clearly as a fact the way you think of stone as hard or winter as cold. She was remarkable. "I know what it is," I said. "Tell me." I looked at the mark on her wrist. I looked at Dran, whose eyes were fully open now, and who was watching me with the particular attention he gave things he had decided were his. I looked at the 7 lords of Valkren, who had not moved, who were watching with the focused silence of men who understand that they are present at something that will be in the records for a century. I looked at Sira. "Your name in full," I said, "for the record." She blinked once. Then, with the composed gravity of someone standing in a place she did not expect but will not refuse, "Sira of the Outer Ward, Garrison Animal Tender, no house, no rank." "No longer," I said. I took her left hand, the one with the mark, still glowing warm against the cold air of the hall, and I held it so that every man in the room could see it clearly, so that Lord Veth could see it, so that the woman in the gallery above could see it and understand and not be left wondering. "This is the fated mate mark of Valkren," I said. I did not raise my voice. The hall was so quiet I did not need to. "It has not been seen in 3 generations. It burns only once for only one person, and it cannot be produced by will or ambition or arrangement." I looked at the 7 lords. You have seen it appear. You are the record of it. I ask you to remember what you saw." Lord Veth opened his mouth. "My Lord Veth," I said, not loudly, "you will have the opportunity to speak at the formal declaration. Tonight, I ask you to wait." He closed his mouth. He was a practical man, whatever else he was. I turned back to Sira. Her hand was steady in mine. The mark was quieting, the silver-gold light softening to a warmth that sat beneath the skin rather than on it. Dran had not moved from her feet. He had, I noticed, placed his chin precisely on her left boot, and he looked as though he intended to remain there indefinitely. "Sira," I said, because I had said her name once already in this hall, and I wanted her to hear it again, in the quiet, now that the first shock of it had passed. "You came here to check his dressing." Something moved in her face, the warmth she kept banked behind the practicality, visible now. "I did. Is it healing correctly?" She glanced down at Dran, who looked up at her with ice-pale eyes. "Yes," she said, "he's healing correctly." "Good," I did not release her hand. "Then you have done what you came to do." "I've also apparently done something else," she said, with a careful dryness that made Warden Fell, standing near the door, press his lips together against a smile. "Several things," I agreed. "We will discuss them, but not tonight and not in front of 7 lords and their opinions." She looked at me for a moment. "All right," she said, which was, I had come to understand, her way of saying, "I trust this. I do not know all of it yet, but I trust this." The formal declaration was made the following morning in the Winter Court, with the border lords as witness and Sira standing beside me in the garrison tender's clothes she had arrived in, because she had not yet had anything else, and she bore the plainness of it with the same composure she bore everything. I had offered to delay until proper clothes could be arranged. She had said there was no point dressing for a thing that had already happened. She was not wrong. Lord Veth attended the declaration. He was too experienced a lord to let his feelings show past a certain precision of expression, the held quality of a man who has revised his understanding of a situation and is not yet finished with the revision. He bowed correctly at the declaration's end, the full bow, the one required by law for the Alpha King's fated mate. He held it for the proper count. I watched him and thought of the old custom of the border lords, that they come to understand the things they cannot change faster than they understand the things they can. Veth would come to terms with it. He was practical enough. His daughter, from what I was told, had greeted the news with a composure that suggested she had long since made her peace with the possibility, and I found myself hoping she would find her own fated thing in her own time, because she deserved better than an arranged wait. Sira was made the Luna Designate of Valkren that morning, with the spring full moon set for the bonding ceremony. This was the law and also the preference, a ceremony in spring, when the world was opening rather than closing, when the worst of the winter had broken and the wolves came back to the high ridge, felt like the right shape for what this was. In the weeks between the declaration and the spring ceremony, I learned her in the way you learn a country, not all at once, but in sections, following each part as it revealed itself. She was 31, older than she had looked in the kennel torchlight. She had been at Valkren's garrison for 6 years, arriving with a letter of reference from a border hold to the south, and skills she had taught herself from a book a traveling healer had given her when she was 17. She had no family she spoke of easily. She had a great deal of patience, and almost no vanity, and the particular practical courage of someone who has spent years being the one who goes toward the thing everyone else is stepping back from. She was not comfortable with the court's attention. She did not pretend otherwise. She was learning the forms with the same concentrated application she had given to wound dressing, methodically, without complaint, asking clear questions when she did not understand something, and remembering the answers without having to be told twice. She talked to Dran every day. She kept checking his dressing long after it was strictly necessary, because she admitted this to me once with some embarrassment. She had gotten into the habit, and he came to the kennel gate when he heard her step on the stair, and she found she did not want to stop. I did not tell her that in 9 years, Dran had never gone to the gate for me. I thought she probably knew. There are things I had expected from a fated bond. The old accounts described them, the recognition, the mark, the certainty. What they did not describe, or did not describe well, was the particular quality of the daily life after the first certainty. The way a fated mate rearranges your understanding of a room simply by being in it. The way you find yourself thinking, in the middle of dispatch reading or border accounting, not of great and consequential things, but of small ones. The way she holds a cup, the way she tilts her head when she is working out a problem, the way she speaks to animals as though they are in the middle of a conversation that started before you arrived. I had never thought myself a man who noticed small things. I was discovering that this was only because the right small things had not previously existed for me to notice. She noticed small things too. She noticed, for instance, that I read the border dispatches in a particular order, Eastern first, then Western, then the Central Ridge always, and one morning she asked why, and I explained the old tactical logic behind it, and she listened and thought and said, "Does that still hold, given how the Eastern Road has shifted the trade patterns?" And I thought about it and said that I was not sure it did, and she said, "I thought not," and went back to learning the forms for the bonding ceremony with the same quiet thoroughness. She asked questions that way, not to catch me out, not to test, but because she was genuinely thinking, and the thinking led somewhere, and she saw no reason to keep the destination to herself. The lords of Valkren rearranged themselves around her over the course of the winter. Not quickly, and not without resistance of varying degrees of subtlety. But Lord Veth's precision of expression softened by degrees. He had apparently spoken to his daughter, who had apparently told him some things that gave him a revised understanding. The other lords followed at their own pace. Warden Fell had taken to Sira with an immediate completeness that required no revision at all. And since Fell's opinion was the water that much of the garrison moved in, the garrison was, by midwinter, entirely hers, which she seemed quietly unsurprised by. Dran was fully recovered by the end of the second week. He remained in the east kennels, and she remained in the east wing rooms that had been made ready for her, and he had apparently decided that the correct distance between himself and the Luna Designate was approximately the length of one corridor, which he managed by means of a door she had learned to leave open. When I came to the east wing in the evenings, which I did with the regularity of a man who has discovered a habit he has no intention of breaking, Dran would be in the corridor or in the outer room, and he would look at me with his ice-pale eyes in a way that I had come to interpret as, "She is yours, and that is correct, and I knew before you did, and you're welcome." I had known powerful wolves. I had not previously known one capable of self-satisfaction. The spring full moon fell on a clear night, the air cold enough to see your breath and warm enough that the wolves came down from the high ridge and gathered on the proving ground in their dozens, which had not happened in living memory during a bonding ceremony. The lords of Valkren had ridden in 2 days before, their winter displeasure at the roads replaced by a kind of hushed excitement that they tried to wear as dignity. The garrison was in dress order. The assembly hall was open-ended, the great south doors thrown wide so that the proving ground lay visible beyond, silver in the moon, the wolves moving through the torchlight at the edge of the courtyard in a slow and deliberate attendance. Sira came in from the east corridor. She was wearing the bonding clothes that had been made for the ceremony, gray wool, the color of Valkren's winter stone, with silver at the cuffs and collar, modest and considered, the sort of thing made to last. Her dark hair was down. The bond mark was visible on her left wrist, now a settled silver gray rather than the burning gold it had been the night of the declaration. Permanent, part of her. She walked the length of the hall to where I stood, and she was not performing anything. She was simply walking toward me the way she did everything, directly, without deflection, with the complete attention of someone who has decided that this is the right thing and has no remaining uncertainty about it. I thought about the kennel. 4 days of fever and 3 handlers with wounds, and the particular silence where his breathing should have been. I thought about the garrison runner arriving at the lord gathering table. She's been in there 2 hours, my lord, and the wolf hasn't moved against her. I thought about stepping into the kennel in the torchlight and seeing Dran's great head at rest, and the woman kneeling in the straw with her sleeves rolled and her hands doing what needed to be done, and the settling feeling in my chest like a door finding its latch. Dran walked in from the east corridor behind her. He had apparently decided that the bonding ceremony was an event that required his attendance, and no one with any sense was going to suggest otherwise. He walked to my side and sat, and looked at Sira with his ice-pale eyes, and then looked at me with the same eyes, and I had the distinct impression that he considered this entire sequence of events. The fever, the kennel, the handler at the gate, the 4 days, all of it, to have been arranged to an acceptable conclusion. The lords of Valkren stood in witness. Lord Veth was in the front rank, his face composed and open in a way that suggested the winter had been time well spent on revision. Above in the gallery, the household. At the south doors, the proving ground and the spring wolves and the full moon flooding the courtyard silver. I took Sira's hand, the one with the mark. "I have ruled Valkren for 9 years," I said, "and I did not know what I was waiting for. My wolf knew before I did." She looked at me. Her eyes were steady and warm, and behind the steadiness was the thing she kept banked, the fullness of it, the open door of it, the landscape she had turned a corner and found. "He has excellent judgment," she said quietly. There was a sound from the gallery, a soft sound, the caught breath of people who are moved by a small true thing, and the ceremony continued, and the spring wolves moved at the edge of the torchlight, and the moon came fully over the ridge. "She is the lunar of Valkren now, and has been since the spring. Dran sleeps across her doorway on cold nights. He has decided this is his arrangement, and no one who values their composure argues with him about it. She tends the animals of the outer ward still, the draft horses, the garrison fowl, because she said she did not see why becoming a Luna should mean the animals went without attention, and because she is a woman who has always done what needed to be done regardless of whether anyone was watching. The garrison handlers have, by natural arrangement, taken to meeting her at the East Wing corridor in the morning, not because they were told to, but because she is the kind of person toward whom people naturally move. Lord Veth came to the summer court and brought no daughter. He brought a gift for Dran, a well-considered piece of cured boar hide, chosen with care, and presented it with the manner of a man making a genuine gesture, not a strategic one. Dran accepted it without ceremony, and Sira thanked Veth with the directness that she gave everything, and I thought the matter could be considered concluded. I think of the kennel often, the torchlight on old stone, her hands steady in the straw, the way Dran did not rise when I entered, because for the first time in 9 years something in that room mattered more to him than marking my arrival, and how I had stood in the corridor and felt the recognition in my chest before I knew her name, before I understood what I was feeling, before the mark and the hall and the declaration and the ceremony. Just the torchlight and the wolf at rest, and a woman who had come in the dark to tend what needed tending. He had known before I did. He had known, I think, from the moment she set foot in the East Wing, perhaps from further back than that, from whatever distance wolves measure these things, through stone walls and garrison yards and the particular winter cold of the high ridge. I trusted him then, I trust him still. And every morning when I wake to the sound of her voice in the corridor, talking to him in that even and uncovering way of hers, not soothing, never performing, simply present and attending, I understand more completely than I did the morning before what the old man meant when he said, "When he chooses, you will know the reason." He chose well, he always did. I was only the last one to know it.